My name is John Raspin. I'll be my main job today is to be facilitating the session overall. I'm joined by two colleagues, Jonathan and Lucretia, who are experts and thought leaders in the energy field. I'll let them introduce themselves more personally when they start talking, but they'll be doing most of the presenting today and taking questions as we go on. So obviously today, the theme of today is looking around flexibility in energy systems and identifying challenges and opportunities around that theme. If you think about it in the overall kind of energy world at the moment, probably one of the biggest headline trends, of course, is the ongoing growth in renewables and all of the sort of challenges and opportunities that creates around it. And that's going to be the main theme of what we talk about today, looking at impacts, looking at themes, trends, transformations, and areas of opportunity coming out from that. Many of you have probably seen in the mainstream news in the last few days, sort of interesting announcement that or kind of realization that what's been coming for a long time tipped over the edge in the first half of this year. Renewable energy accounted for the majority share of global electricity production for the first time, overtaking coal, which is interesting. Obviously, there's some subtle nuances to that by region and by technology type and things like that. But it's a good reason why we're having this conversation at the moment, looking at the impact of that across different areas. As you can see on this slide, today's presentation, we're going to be looking at the impact and opportunities and challenges around energy flexibility across three main areas. Upstream in the field of generation, in grids around transmission and distribution systems, etc., and more at the downstream usage end in terms of behind the meter, both in terms of usage patterns, but also in terms of kind of impact and opportunities for behind the meter assets that can play a key role in both tackling the challenges created by changes in energy systems, but also enabling and creating some of those kind of flexibility opportunities that we're going to mostly be focusing on today. So very much looking forward to the discussion. We're going to start with a presentation to get everybody warmed up and to share some of Frost & Sullivan's insights around this key topic. Feel free to be putting your questions into the chat even while the presentation is going on. You don't need to wait till the end. We will do our best to get as many questions covered in the discussion after the presentation. So please do that as we go. But let's get straight into the topic. I'm going to hand over to Jonathan, who's going to take the lead on the beginning of the presentation and share that around a little bit with Lucretia, and then we'll pause for questions when the time comes. So Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you very much, John. So as John says, I'll start out the presentation. I lead the energy and buildings practice within Frost & Sullivan, but I would say that the energy system is probably my home turf within that area. So I've got lots of experience covering this and tracking this market now for quite a long time. As John said, we have seen already a significant increase in the amount of electricity coming from renewable sources. This year, renewables combined overtook coal for the first half of the year. We have to see how it lines up for the whole year, but certainly it increased its share. And by 2035, so in a decade's time, over half of electricity globally will come from renewables. And particularly as well, we'll be looking more at rates of, say, 75, 80% in Europe. So we will see significant portions coming as we see the decline of coal and a different role for gas. So as you can see here, in our tracking, you've got huge increases in the capacity on the left-hand side, but then on the right-hand side, you can really see the generational change, and you can see how that yellow bar, particularly for solar, really increases. But you can also see wind is also playing a big role at the top too, and probably past 35, we'll see wind coming in even more. Also worth noting that the amount of electricity generated by our forecasts will be about 40% higher globally than it is now in 2025. So we've got population growth, we've got the power requirements from data centers, we've got the electrification of vehicles, we've got economic growth as much as it can be in some regions. All of these will factor in to mean there's a lot more electricity on the grid, and far more of it will be coming from renewables. So today, as John says, we're going to talk about three main areas. We're first going to discuss more on the generation side. And within generation, we are actually going to include grid-scale battery storage as well. So it's not really to talk about wind and solar, it's more to talk about the technologies that can enable the flexible energy system on the generation side of things. We will then also address transmission and distribution. And there's a lot of things that can be done here, both in terms of the expansion of the overall network, but actually a few of the things I'll talk about a little bit more today are actually things that we can do with the existing network to make it more flexible and more efficient. And the last thing that we'll talk about is behind the meter. Now, the behind the meter includes energy sources that contribute to the challenge or the opportunity. So that's where things like EVs will require more power. Obviously, heat pumps will require electricity. So we essentially have consumers, I guess, or products that will consume electricity. But these are also key elements in the flexible energy system. So if you obviously think about an EV, for example, some of us most of us spend a lot of the time not driving the EV, and it is actually parked outside our house. When it's parked outside our house and plugged in, be it day or night, it is an asset that can be utilized by the grid to help increase flexibility. So if you're in the UK and you park your EV up at 6 o'clock at night, the utilities will be very keen to use that electricity for 6, 7, 8 o'clock, particularly in winter when demand is really high. So those things are increasingly, particularly EVs, but all of these kind of things are really considered an asset, and we'll cover those a little bit later on as well. I'm going to hand over to Lucretia now to take us through the storage section. So Lucretia, it's over to you.
Yes, Jonathan. Well, I am Lucretia Gomez. I also part of the research team as a research director in the energy and environmental. And we would like to start by giving you a look of the versatility of the battery energy storage systems across the grid. So we know that batteries are not just a backup option, they are becoming essential for making power grids more flexible. They are helping services like regulating voltage, supporting transmission. They are basically easing the whole congestion in the grid. So batteries right now are the key, and they are essential to building a smarter and more reliable infrastructure. What we are using right now is helping to manage costs, demand charges, and improve the power and quality of the systems. The key drivers that we are seeing right now are the intention to avoid peak charges, the opportunity to create more revenue streams. We're also seeing that the lowering incentives are helping, and the regulations mandates are helping in certain regions. And at the same time, we're also seeing challenges in other regions where these systems are, or the rules are very unclear, or the electricity prices are dropping. If we go to the next slide, Jonathan, I would like to talk a little bit and give them a closer look about the numbers that we are seeing in this market. So what we are seeing right now is that it's expected that investment by the end of this year will reach around 79 billion, and this amount will double by the end of 2030 and maybe reach beyond 300 billion by the end of 2035. This growth is impressive, of course, and shows that what we're saying, what we've been saying from the beginning, that battery energy storage is increasing, but it's also a key part of the energy transition. Within these sectors, the most important one are the grid scale storage, which is basically changing the way we are seeing traditional peaking plants, and it's helping increase their renewable energy introduction. So on the other side, we are also tracking the battery cell prices. And if we look into that, we noticed that by 2020, we were seeing the price goes from $110 per kilowatt, but we're expecting to reach $40 per kilowatt by the end of 2030. This does not only make batteries more affordable, but they are also driving the whole growth in all the segments. So if we notice, we will see that residential, commercial, and grid scales, all the segments are growing. Of course, grid is driving the most important part of the growth, but each of them are increasing. In fact, we are expecting around 270 gigawatts of installed every year. And if we go to the next one, Jonathan, what we would like to give you here, and we will discuss it more later, is an idea of what is general ecosystem, because we talk about the versatility of the system, we talk about the numbers, and now we want to show you what's on. So we know that in terms of storage, we have different technologies, some of them that for short duration storage that goes from a few seconds to an hour. Then we have medium duration storage that goes up to 8 hours. Then long duration between 8 to 24, and ultra long duration that is beyond 24. Why this is important? Because right now the focus is on long and ultra long duration storage. Sean and Jonathan, both of them mentioned the importance of renewables and the growth of renewables. We all know that, as you said before, over the last few days, renewables took over from coal in terms of power generation. So now it's becoming crucial to help this renewable integrate into the grid. So these technologies, long-term duration and ultra long-duration storage, are the key systems that can help on that. Here, it gives you an idea of how you can play with them and what are the key interactions that you can do. For example, they can help for capacity, they can help in the efficiency, they can also improve quality, they can easily integrate sources, they are enable self-consumptions. So you have different options on how you can play between the different technologies that you see and the different storage systems. How you use it and when you use it depends on the target. If you are whether targeting large-scale renewables, if you are just filling a small power gap, but in all cases, they are crucial for the transition. And in the next slides, we would like to go a little bit just on one of them, which is long duration storage. And this gives you an idea of the current technologies that we have. Jonathan mentioned at the beginning that we want to talk to or give you a flavor for at least of what we have in these technologies. So here we see that it goes from 3 to 9. Basically, what we're saying is we are covering the readiness level of this technology. If they are in 3, they are not ready at all. They are just in the demonstration phase. If they are 9, they are in the commercial stage. So in this chart, you will see that we have multiple technologies at the commercial stage right now, but we'll still have at least 6 to 7 technologies that are not ready for commercial, but none of them is in the 3 stage. So the market is not growing rapidly in terms of investment, but it's also growing rapidly in terms of technology, and mostly because of the decreasing cost that we are seeing in every single of them.
Super, thank you, Lucretia. That's the storage wrap up. I think one comment I would make, we very rarely, particularly for batteries, revise our storage forecast down. We track over 50 countries in detail across residential, commercial, and grid, for example, for battery storage. And it's hardly ever, I think, that we take something down. Now, obviously, a lot of those markets are still emerging, but in general, even markets that already quite substantial tend to be increasing. And for most of those markets now, certainly the sort of tier 1 ones, there is some form of incentives that is really moving things forward. So moving on, we're going to have a few different things that we're just going to introduce here. So we're not going to deep dive into too many, but advanced inverters is one that I just wanted to highlight. These are getting more and more pivotal, I would say, in the energy system. So obviously, at the moment, they are there really as the gateway technology between the renewable energy source and the grid, but a lot of them have just been following. So they haven't really had any intelligence behind them. Whereas now we are certainly seeing a move towards what we call forming, which is essentially where these decentralized energy resources can optimize when they are accessing the grid, essentially. So as we have a significant portion of decentralized resources on the grid, having the inverters there with the intelligence basically to determine when and when not these assets should be coming on is definitely important. Now, obviously, they're backed up by software, various other things behind that as well, but they are certainly playing a bigger role in grid stability and also grid flexibility. And part of flexibility within the grid is also obviously ensuring that it's stable. Another one here is just talking about how the grid becomes more autonomous. So we have an automated grid now. So we definitely, and this is an example, and this can apply for a lot of industries, actually, but for the power sector certainly, we've slowly found that within the industry, we've moved away from doing things sort of at a manual basis. We have obviously moved now towards deploying things like machine learning. And essentially, we're now looking at the sort of stage 4, 5, and 6, which again will lead into flexibility. So basically, we'll be transitioning from saying, really, you had a problem, we did this action, you'll see the problem coming, you take the action, but then actually you'll be going more to specifying, actually, there will be a problem at a certain time. And actually, really, the level 6 is where you are saying, I understand the problem will be there and I can take action proactively to solve the problem, to avoid it being a problem. This becomes more relevant definitely for generation technologies, but it also becomes, I think, more significant for a lot of the grid technologies as well, because part of having a flexible energy system, again, is having a robust and secure energy system with these things in mind. And this is where a lot of the sort of AI investment is going behind the scenes into things like this. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about are what we call grid enhancing technologies, which is a term that I would say has definitely gained traction in the last sort of 3-4 years. And this is essentially coming on the premise of it will be difficult to expand the grid to the extent that we would really ideally like to. So we all know that building huge, capitally intensive, disruptive projects is not always going to be possible or is going to take us a long time. We're going to have public opposition. If you think of the situation in Germany with getting excess wind and solar power from the north down to the south, that has been extremely challenging because the areas it runs through in Germany is just one example of everywhere else. So these kind of technologies, their fundamental thing really is about improving the existing assets on the grid. So dynamic line ratings is really about using sensor technology that can actually improve the transmission capacity. Power flow controls is about redirecting power away from congested lines into other areas. And topology optimization, which is a similar sort of offering, is essentially software-driven solutions that can basically reconfigure the entire grid. Now, this is important because you can certainly have a situation where parts of the grid may be very heavily congested, but there could simply be another route that you could go around where actually the power demand isn't as high. What's also interesting about this space is you are tending to see maybe very large organizations sometimes partnering with smaller. So you've got, Siemens Energy and Emerson, both, huge multi-billion-dollar cross-industry businesses. New Grid and Smart Wires, I suspect far fewer of our audience would understand, would have heard of these companies and be sure exactly what they would do. So that's also been a big change as well. Another one is the use of conductor technologies. So not something that's particularly mainstream understood, but essentially it's the base principle that at the moment we are using a lot of old technology. We are using old materials that have been in the grid for decades and decades in some cases. Everything's based on aluminium and steel, whereas if you replace the conductors with something made of carbon fiber, you can increase the amount of power that can be transmitted. And equally, the superconducting cables is about essentially carrying more over the same network. So these are going to be really interesting in areas, particularly where we would struggle to add significant capacity as well. Next one is more behavioral. So demand response is essentially trying to manage consumer behavior to determine when exactly they are putting different devices online. Part of it as well is all about getting the connectivity online as well. If I give the example of demand response, Octopus is a UK utility, getting increasingly well known, I would say, in other geographies, but particularly big in the UK. They have been one of the leading ones, but I have to say a lot of the utilities have followed them about having different pricing for different timings and also free electricity sessions at certain times. Or equally encouraging you not to use electricity at a certain time for some rewards. Now, the challenge with this is, I know from my own experience, the rewards are not always particularly generous right now, but it is something where they're trying to build incremental engagement with consumers to try and mitigate the amount of excess capacity that we might need to build for the grid and also therefore make the system more flexible. Another one, virtual power plants. We expect this to be a $6 billion market by 2030. A virtual power plant is essentially a way of aggregating a number of disparate energy resources into one major system, which can then be used to balance the grid and to manage the power flows in different areas. And certainly this is continuing to grow. It's starting almost to involve being part of other solution offerings in some cases rather than being its own distinct offering. It's an area where a lot of the storage companies have gone in. But this will be more and more important, particularly as we electrify more of our industry, more of our commercial operations, and even we electrify things like cars. This will become more significant going forward. There will be more capacity that we can utilize in a virtual power plant. Again, with flexibility, a couple of examples here, more on the flexible system side. So Kraken, very well known. Octopus and Kraken are now separating. Quite possibly, I would suspect people on this call are aware that Kraken will be up for an IPO fairly recently. If you're in the UK energy world, you'll certainly have followed that. But they have got significant assets, and they're one of a few companies that also are increasingly having a large number of households that they're connected with, and it makes them more of a significant player in the system. We have the example of Sunrun in the US, who've been launching a vehicle to grid pilot for bidirectional charging. So at the moment, charging is not everywhere's got bidirectional enabled, and this again is wrapping into a VPP proposition. And we also have the example of Envilio, which is managing roughly half the resources that are connected to the German DNO network are running through, the distributed energy resources are running through their platforms, and they've been really successful at doing that. Another example of how we'll see more flexibility, this is Octopus. They, in July, launched a plan, basically a power pack bundle, which is essentially a vehicle to grid where you get the car, the charger, and your energy plan all rolled into one. And for certainly a very affordable price. So it's with BYD. So BYD obviously very keen to get into the UK market to do it. One of the issues with charging is obviously I've got to sort out the charger. I've got to figure out what plan I'm on. The idea with this is to take it away and make it all in one. And this is a model I think we'll see others deploying as well. And it's something that we also will see Octopus deploying in things like heat pumps and other areas as well. This is just I've mentioned Kraken. I also want to call out a few other companies here, Kaluza, Gentrack, SAP. This is actually a radar that we have recently completed on customer care and engagement in utilities. And flexibility is a really important part of that solution now. So a lot of traditional customer care a decade ago, 15 years ago, would have been around efficient metering and billing. But now the ability to offer more dynamic tariffs, to manage loads, to really engage with the consumer as they have more assets is becoming really important. And this market is double-digit growth. We still haven't really scratched the surface of the potential around the world. A few markets like the UK, Australia, New Zealand are sort of further ahead, but there's an awful lot of growth coming in the coming years in this area. Flexibility from bidirectional charging. So as I said, at the moment, that's not something that's totally widespread, but it is really ramping up over the course of this decade. And I mean, the unit sales of cars, these will be higher when we update them because they've been much stronger in China. But we're seeing in a number of geographies very strong sales, for example, in places like Turkey. But even in the UK, we're looking at 30% of new cars being EVs. This is all starting to have a big impact on the options for making the grid more flexible. And I say the degree of charging at the moment, it's very much one way for the majority of assets. By 2035, the bar shows you how it will have turned around. It will have moved a lot more towards stages 4, 5, and 6, with 1 and 2 being a relatively small amount of it. Heat pumps, big growth in heat pumps in the next decade. Again, they will be assets for the energy system as well. Not as significant, I would probably say, as the car overall in what they'll mean, but it will mean more electrification of the grid, and it will certainly be something that, again, some of our leading utilities will be putting into their energy propositions. Industrial, just very briefly on industrial, we will see more industrial demand response gaining pace as well. I mentioned it before, and I was talking a little bit more on the probably on the residential side, but we are seeing more and more companies as they invest in different distributed energy resources. It can be a combination of different variable loads and things like solar and battery storage coming in. This is definitely creating, as I say, more virtual power plants within a commercial industrial setting, different engagement models, and different project economics. It's not going to touch heavy industry as much because of the amount of power they need, but it is going to be significant for that sort of commercial, sort of lower mid-level. Near the end now, so this is just an idea of, and this is from Electric, but I thought it was quite interesting to show, really just to give a very snapshot idea. There's a lot more depth behind all the work that they do, but the amount of demand that could be shifted if we start deploying these things, and it is quite substantial. So these are EU 27 plus EU plus UK perspectives, and as you can see, if we're able to shift things by 3, 4, 5 hours, the gigawatts that we can flexibly use in load shoot up quite significantly. And you can see, potentially not so much now, but as we get into the 2030s, you can really see that ramping up for heat pumps. You can see it ramping up on the charging side, and you can also see it on the industrial side. So by all the things that I've talked about in this, this presentation, you can see a lot happening there. So final thoughts from my side, and then we'll go to a bit of a Q&A and discussion. We need flexibility. With the amount of renewables we're adding and the electrification that we're putting in, we've got to have more flexibility in the system. There's a number of technologies and solutions that contribute, so it's not one thing only. It really is that old classic. It is a suite of things that are deployed at different levels. It's 15 to 20 maybe core technology solution offerings that all come together. It's not about just building new. It is about utilizing what we've already got and enhancing what's already there. And there are definitely still startup opportunities there. I mean, I've talked about Octopus a few times, but a decade ago, Octopus wasn't a company that really existed. I think they were founded in 2016. Envilio didn't exist a decade ago. Some of the companies, I think, Kaluza is probably a similar age that I showcased on the radar. And some of the other companies were relatively small and have pivoted. So we've seen small companies pivot, but we genuinely have seen companies that weren't offering anything at all in this space coming in. So it's not just about everything being dominated by the old traditional players. There is really opportunity for others to come in. So that's it for the presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can see us all a bit more, and then we'll take any questions that have come in.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan and Lucretia, for the insightful presentation. Lots of stuff. We've covered a lot of stuff in a fairly short period of time, but we've still got a bit of time on our hands to take some questions. There's been some questions. I've got a thought or two of my own for you guys. There's a couple of questions that have come in from the audience that I'll share as well. But just a reminder to everybody else, do feel free to keep putting your questions into chat. We appreciate it. We'll address as many as we can, and any that we don't get chance to address here and now, we can follow up separately. But one thing I will say, I'm going to merge 2 or 3 questions actually, because a few people have asked more or less similar questions, which align a little bit with something I said right at the very beginning, which was that some of the nuances around some of the bigger conclusions we've been making today are quite regional. So we've had a few questions effectively asking us what things look like in different parts of the world. They've been worded slightly differently, but I'll merge those questions so we don't have to ask them 3 times. But maybe just before we go into a few other questions, Jonathan, if you want to go for just a few thoughts on how you see things playing out in different parts of the world.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll talk about, I mean, Europe is one, there's been more European numbers in this presentation. Europe has generally been, certainly the UK as a liberalised energy market has been at the forefront of a lot of the examples that I've given. I'm also here, so just naturally you're more likely to run into the examples firsthand. But we've definitely seen the UK be a leader in this. We are seeing, Belgium, Netherlands have also, there's been some activity in the Nordics as well. But we've certainly seen those countries doing well. As I mentioned, Australia has been a strong market as well, even though EV is not deployed as much, but there's an awful lot of decentralized solar in Australia. You've got, I think, 3-4 million households with residential solar PV. There's definitely opportunities. Japan is one. There's been energy market reforms in Japan that means that there's definitely interest in there. I expect to see some announcements on flexible offerings in Japan. Coming back to Europe, and I'll let Lucretia talk about the Americas. Germany is probably still largely underserved, and Italy and Spain. These markets have yet to really get going, but I think we will see greater deployment of a lot of these technologies and solutions there. So storage will catch up in all of these markets. We've had strong solar PV, but we'll see storage certainly catching up. We'll see more flexible utility offering agreements coming in. ENGIE have signed a big agreement with Kaluza for 20 million customers across particularly Europe. So we'll see a lot of activity there. So there's some big announcements to come in this space overall. Lucretia, maybe you for the Americas for some comments.
Yes, well, as you mentioned, it's growing everywhere. In Americas, it's not an exception. It's interesting to see that, for example, in US, there are multiple thoughts about the OBB and the impact that this will have in the industry, whether it will restrain the growth of renewables in the market. We're not seeing that. We're seeing that most of the companies are kind of accelerating deployment, whether this year or the next one, before they run out of incentives. But at the same time, there is a revised investment mix in the industry too, because even the ones that are not right now investing in renewable are able to complete the plans with this year and the next one before all the incentives run out. They are rethinking the way that they can flexibilize the grid, maybe changing the investment, not changing the power generation, to maybe putting the money in a smarter grid systems, and in that flexibility plays a big role. So whether we're talking about deploying new renewables or whether we're talking restraining the deployment of renewables, grid will be seeing more investment, whether in one way or another. They are understanding that they have to invest in the flexibilization and smarter systems in order to comply with this new. And of course, the situation is not the same for the rest of the Americas. I mean, we're talking about Latin America, we're not there yet. Even when the deployment of renewable is picking up, especially in countries like Brazil, sometimes in Chile, even in Argentina, we're seeing more. But it's not quite there. I mean, they are still in the beginning phases of the deployment, and even the grid flexibilization is an issue in some cases. They don't have money right now to invest that much. So we won't see the same level of investment. But if we're seeing growth rates in general, yes, the growth rates are cute because we're going from almost nothing to something in the next 3 years. So it will depend whether we're looking to growth in terms of total growth or whether we're looking to actual dollars. It's a good market in both cases.
Very interesting. So I guess the conclusion there is that there's clearly a lot of global themes, but there are significant nuances and differences in the life cycle stage of opportunities in different parts of the world. So no, thanks for the insights, guys. I'll keep going. We're getting lots of good questions in from the audience, actually, so I'll park some of my own and let's focus on the audience questions. One is, what are the evolving standards in such integrations, brackets, electric vehicles and VPP, virtual power plant, and what is the pace of their development and adoption across industry stroke globally? So I guess quite a broad question, but you know, the theme obviously being the evolving standards, and what role that plays.
Yeah, I think you do need a clear sort of framework of standards and regulations to enable a lot of these things to happen. So if you aren't clear about what is going to be required of people operating in the market, and you either actively place roadblocks in the way, or you don't maybe remove incremental roadblocks that just happen to be there, then it will hold back the industry's development overall. So you know, one example was Germany. The way that DNOs used to be sort of incentivized was certainly always to more about just building more capacity than investing in anything else. So it was very hard for them to really focus on, I don't know, you know, going for storage or for really optimizing as much, because it was more about just build. You know, you're rewarded for wires in the ground. If you have that kind of mentality across any of these things, then obviously it won't really work. So, and it's not always about having you know, clear like incentives, as in, you know, $3,000 off a car type things. It can sometimes just be not having a barrier in place. I think what I could say, I mean, the most developed are, I've sort of already said this really, but the most developed are still obviously some of the European, Australia, New Zealand. You know, you have conversations with people, these ones do tend to stand out. You get definitely a few of the sort of Gulf states that are catching up, but their whole need for flexibility and some of these solutions is different. It's not just such an important thing for them because they've got other areas that they can sort of channel for this. But it really is those, if you haven't got large deployments of significant penetration of renewables and you're not really on the cusp of having EVs, then it's not so important that you invest in all this. There will not be the clear case. But I think it's the combination of those two that is really interesting. And renewables we see incrementally going up. I find the EV part really interesting because I see it shooting up in countries that maybe we haven't seen before. So we've always seen like Turkey and Sweden and the Netherlands have been high, but we're starting to see, you know, Turkey, I noticed it shot up because it had a domestic manufacturer, and the Chinese are now targeting more markets in Southeast Asia. So all of this could well end up driving things into markets that are not so developed now.
Yeah. So I guess looking at the question, really, it's fairly fast evolving on the standards front, but typically sort of needs led. So when you start to see the growth in EVs and in renewables alongside that, the standards start to accelerate as they're needed, and sort of, you know, you mentioned obviously differences by region as well. So no, interesting. Thank you very much. Just keep moving on. There's another question. Sit tight because it's a fairly long one, but there's some good parts to pick out on, I think, some good elements here. In virtual grid, what are the differentiating trends that you see in US, Europe and APAC, particularly India? Anything specifically on control versus digital twin versus scenario planning tools, and levels, regional, national, etc. And any Gen AI, agentic AI needs for report generation or recommendation engines. So appreciate there's quite a lot to that question, and maybe we can pick that up afterwards as well. But just any specific elements of that you want to jump on?
Yeah, I might break it down into a couple of quick comments from my side. I think on the virtual grid, I won't repeat what I've already said too much. You know, US, certain markets are further ahead. US, yes. US in the middle, really, because as Lucretia mentioned a little bit for the US, there is demand, but it does depend which state you're in and what the rate cases are there. And the question I picked out India, I think it's interesting just to spend a moment on India, because I think that's a market that really will see quite significant growth in the next decade and a changing of position. So you've got a market that right now has a very low penetration of smart metering, you know, relatively few electric cars, more on scooters, but relatively few electric cars, still not that much decentralized storage or renewables relative to the size of it, but you will really see big growth there. I think it goes from, I can't remember the exact number, but it grows from like our 30th largest storage market to our 5th in a decade. So it's like the fastest mover essentially. So I do think India will certainly be playing a big role in decades' time. It will still have coal-fired power plants. It will still have other energy needs, but I think it will be able to get capacity for some of these areas onto the grid because of the needs that it has, and in some cases because of its lower cost base for some of the solutions. The second part, digital twins. What I would say, digital twins are, yes, there are a unique individual concept, but all of these platforms are essentially being brought together more and more. So there is, in one platform, you have lots of different elements. It's often hard to break out and say, this bit is doing this bit doing this bit doing that, because they are coming together so often. You know, we sometimes get questions, how big is the AR market in energy? And it's like, well, actually, it's quite difficult because it's a fundamental part of it. But digital twins now, I think, are very much becoming a mainstream for any grid operator for the assets that they have. So, you know, they really do have a profile of what your car is and where it is and what your charging behaviors are. And they'll have that for all the assets that we have. Again, the scenario planning tools have become much more advanced into, again, AI driven. The last point, Gen AI, agentic AI, certainly I can say for the flexibility guys, they are really utilizing that a lot more, as are we all really, into really boosting the intelligence of the offerings that they have. So they are deploying it just every few months. There'll be a new wave of something that each of them will launch or an update that will bring more and more AI capabilities into what the energy system can do. So incrementally over time, that will become far more significant than we see right now.
And is a lot of that in diagnostics, in analytics, and in reporting? I mean, I certainly see a lot of the innovation around AI being in those sort of more specific areas. Is that where we're also beginning to see the growth happening?
Yeah, definitely. So it is a much greater understanding of just taking things to the next level of exactly what you can do. It's kind of a hard thing to sort of visualize, I guess, but it will just be a better level of intelligence in knowing all the assets it has on the grid. You know, at the moment, these companies are doing it really well. They're managing huge amounts of assets and they're managing them, you know, pretty efficiently. But AI will just give them that extra level to really optimize when everything comes online, and that's where you can gain more, incrementally more. And another example, it's just top of my mind because I suppose I've been doing the customer care radar, but you know, the use of AI, for example, in utility operations, yes, they are already using it, but the degree to which they use it is continually increasing. So essentially, more and more of the interactions are AI led. Even if there's a human involved, more of the back end work is being done AI. So you know, maybe a few years ago, 20% of things were handled by AI. You know, when you called up and said, this is my name, and they validated that and passed you on, well, that's shifting more and more that AI is answering more of your problem. And I think it replicates across all of the things we're talking about here. A greater percentage of activity is covered by AI.
Yeah, to add into that, the reason that why they are also using in this segment is because it's the best way of testing the systems without giving full access to the entire plant. And that's why some of them are specifically testing in report generation recommendations to engines rather than giving them access to the whole process of how they manufacture engines and this kind of thing, especially the companies that are not generating their own models, their own IEs, that are using other companies' IE or other system services providing IE, is a secure way of testing the system. And it doesn't require the same kind of investment that if you're generating your own IE and using it for the entire company, the entire OEM models and these kind of things. So that's why we are seeing that this first part is kind of the first wave of these companies using AI. Then we'll probably, if they feel it's safe, they can give them access to the rest of the system. If they have enough investment to develop the whole thing, they will use it in other sectors too.
No, that's a great answer, great point. No, really, thanks for the comments, guys. I hope that we've at least partially addressed the questions of the audience. They were quite rich questions, but at least you've pulled out a few good themes from that. So really appreciate that. Guys, I'm mindful of everybody's time. We will be making sure we finish on time, but I just room for one last question. I want just each of you in 30 seconds to help us with a kind of a closing point, really. I mean, we've covered a lot of stuff today. Talked about an awful lot of different areas of challenge and opportunity across grids, across generation, across storage, and across downstream solutions. But if you were to stick your own neck out, just to be bold, and you're only allowed one answer, if there was any one sort of tech or solution that we've covered today that you think really stands out as the most dynamic or attractive for the next few years? I know it's a difficult one when you cover lots of different areas, but just top of mind, what really stands out? What do you think's the boldest opportunity of everything we've talked about? Jonathan, you can go first.
I really think it's the car, personally. I think it's the deployment of electric vehicles, because I really think, although it won't crazily drive the electricity demand up as much as some people think, because of all this technology we can deploy because of it, I think it will give us sizable assets to change the pattern within the energy system we have. So I think obviously backed by the technology, but I really think the vehicle to grid is the one I would pick.
Right. So you mean the vehicle as a grid asset?
Yeah.
And,
yeah, exactly.
Interesting. There you go. I'm sure something that I know we cover that in extensive detail, and something that perhaps we'll also tackle in a future one of these sessions. Lucretia, what do you think?
It's not there yet, but I think ultra long duration storage will be key in the future. I mean, we need it. If we increase the renewable part of the mix and we keep using more renewable and adding more renewable into the grid, we will need ultra long storage. Now, it won't be enough when the one that we have right now. We'll need more than 24 hours of storage in each of the systems, and we need to get there as fast as possible. So I think companies will need to think an investment and maybe doing more trials into that.
No, really good point. I think it's an interesting one, because it's definitely an area we see a lot of investment and innovation, a lot of interest, a lot of development. But I think the large scale, long duration and ultra long duration storage is still behind, still lagging behind, really, when we look at, in spite of really strong growth, by the way. I mean, lots, from a market perspective, you presented the numbers yourself, some very attractive growth there. But when we look at the pace and rate of investment in renewables, in renewables, and the pace of that development, storage is, in terms of actual utilizable capacity, is clearly still lagging behind. But interesting to see you really pull that to the fore as your bet for the next few years. So to our audience, join us in the future to hear our thoughts on some of those topics as well, or to see whether Jonathan and Lucretia turned out to be right or not on what was going to be most dynamic. But guys, we're drawing towards the end now. I think we'll call time on the discussion. Many thanks to everyone from the audience for joining us today, and for your great questions to keep the discussion flowing. We really appreciate it. Many thanks to Lucretia and Jonathan for the insights that you've shared through the presentation and the discussion as well, of course.